Hi, everybody. Before we dive into this week's podcast, I wanted to take the time to recognize our Wig Out sponsors, whose contributions help provide free and accessible art education programs such as this podcast. Thank you to Raleigh Credit Union for their generous support. Now, here's the show. All right, so today with me in the studio, I have Mystic Multiples. They're risograph printing company based in Houston, Texas. And Mystic Multiples is James Beard and Sarah Welch. Glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Could you share with us a little bit about how you met, where Mystic Multiples started? How did you get to risographs?
Sure. We actually met in Austin, Texas. I was working at a place that did screen printing, and Sarah was looking for a screen printer to help on printing like a couple of pieces for a show that she was doing. That was at a gallery called Collab. And then I was working at a place called the Serie Project in Coronado Studio. Yeah, we just started collaborating then. And from there, just kept making project after project, moved to Houston.
Yeah, it's funny. When we met was like a weird when the our printmaking journey started was like a funny time for me because I was working at a restaurant in Austin and I was just trying to like save up some money and I had taken a leave of absence from school from my undergrad art program and I was trying to decide whether to go back to school or not. And during I think that was like a 9-month period or something. So I like had the show and then we met. And then I feel like, yeah, it took me on like a whole nother trajectory.
And specifically the risograph stuff came about because we were interested in doing like a lot of comics and kind of zines and stuff like that. And I think around 2012 or 2013, I started to see videos online of people just introducing like risograph, riso printing and watching those videos. I was like, this would be a really great way to do comics because it's a lot faster than doing screen prints. Because at that time, it's like a different screen for every page, front and back, every color. So some of those projects in the early days would be like 30, 48 screens, like easily. So that amount of labor being able to be kind of reduced made it more sustainable. Like it made it so that the comics didn't have to be like $100 each. So kind of looked around. We found on Craigslist, actually, an old Baptist school was selling a GR model risograph. And we were like, let's get it. So contact them, send an email. We drove in like our little hatchback car, lifted the riso into the back, drove it back to Houston. And from there, I started working in riso stuff.
For people who aren't familiar with risograph printing, I think more people are familiar with the idea of screen printing or block printing. Could you explain maybe a little bit of a difference between risograph printing and screen printing or other forms of printing?
Sure. So a lot of times in printmaking, it's like, how do you get the ink on the page is how they define it, right? So like with risograph printing, it's kind of similar to what they used to call mimeograph printing, which is like this early kind of like way of they would do like stuff in stores, like make the little like signs for old timey grocery stores that are like 99 cents or like sale. And it's essentially a stencil. It's a paper stencil, and it's a little bit more modern because it looks like a copy machine. And what it does is when it scans your artwork, it creates holes, like they're kind of thermally created holes in a sheet of paper. And that works a lot like screen printing. So it's a stencil that lets the ink pass through. So in that way, there's a lot of overlap with screen printing, a lot of overlap with like block printing. It's just a little bit of that screen making or stencil making process is done by the machine.
And then has this process has obviously been around for a while, but do you feel like it's gaining popularity as a printing medium?
I think so. It's one of those things where I think the history of printmaking has a lot of stuff that's like commercial process. And then once it starts to be kind of out of date or obsolete with commercial printing, then you see like artists kind of pick up that used equipment and try to see what they can do. And I think a lot of the riso stuff falls into that. And we've seen like a really big explosion of people liking that kind of, I guess I would call it like a graphic art kind of illustrative style, where I think with riso, people see a lot of bright colors. They see reduced color palettes. sometimes. And that kind of visual language, I think, has gotten really popular because of there's just a lot of exposure to like 100% full color photography, like in the visual world that we have right now. So I think people like that difference with Riso.
Right. Like a little bit more graphic feel.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you both about your, I guess, like academic. Like, did you, Sarah, mentioned taking a break from your undergrad. You ultimately decided to go back and finish, or?
Yeah, I ultimately went back and finished. I think I was about, yeah, I think it was, I want to say I was like about halfway through the program at the time. And I was going to school in Chicago at SIC, School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And it's a great school, but it's also a very like expensive art school. Yeah, I'm really glad I ended up going back because I feel like the second half of my experience there was a lot more transformative and important than like my first couple of years in school.
I have like a little bit, not so much of the traditional art degree. Like I ended up getting a degree in Russian language and literature. I had a minor in art courses, but just kind of followed that path through interning with like arts organizations, like working in the nonprofit and later in commercial printing. And that's how I got my printmaking education.
For both of you, did you both know that you wanted to go into art at like a somewhat early age, like making that decision to get a minor or get your full undergrad in art? Like, could you talk about what experiences you had that led you to want to pursue art?
Yeah, for me, I think it's basically the only thing I've ever felt good at. So for me, I feel like I had more of a little more of a boring, one-sided path, I guess. Like I went to like a high school that had like a lot of fine arts programming. It was sort of like prototypical magnet school where they had like more courses than normal for visual arts. And then after that, went directly to an art school, did my 4 years in Chicago. I came back to Texas and actually I've been out of school for, over a decade now. But a couple years ago, I decided to go back to get an MFA. So now I'm in a program, a sculpture studio program at the University of Houston. And I'm 2 years into that program of a 3-year program right now.
And I had a very kind of non-linear approach. I would say the main thing that got me interested in the arts was doing a lot of stuff with the like DIY, like do it yourself movement. I was kind of interested in music. I had worked at like college radio. We did a lot of like fundraisers where it was like people were making their own little items or putting on like little art shows just as like fundraiser activities for the radio station. We organized like a parade one time that was really freaky. Like we put a generator in the back of a van. So all of those like DIY activities, I was like, there's something I really like about this. And I think it overlaps with art. So why don't I look at doing art more? And that's kind of what got me into it.
Yeah, for sure. Like all of those creative processes kind of like coming together and functional in ways. Sarah, what made you decide to go back and pursue an MFA?
Basically, because my undergrad years I spent doing a lot of printmaking, drawing, a little bit of like fibers work. Actually, when I got out of school, or before I got out of school, I was like hoping to do surface design for like textiles, sort of more of a like graphic illustration career. I don't know. I enjoy doing art so much more. And I started doing a little more installation work over the years. And through doing that, I realized, oh, it'd be really benefit me. I think I'd get a lot out of like learning a little more like technical building skills. And so part of wanting to go back to school for sculpture was just like to get into like wood shop space and try to learn some new things.
What factors did you look at when picking an MFA program?
Honestly, I was pretty certain I wanted to go to UH because of the convenience. Like James and I have lived in Houston for God, coming up on what is it now? Almost 15 years or something.
Probably like, yeah, 13 years or something.
Okay, listen. But a long time. And I wasn't ready to like pick up and move. to go somewhere else. So I was like, you know what, we're in Houston now. The school is right here. They have a nice program. They have nice facilities. I was like, I should just like do this.
And I think the funding side of it too, I remember was part of the research phase.
Or yeah,
'Cause,
for it. Yeah.
yeah, because I think a lot of people don't know this, but there are like a lot of fully funded MFAs where you might not necessarily have to pay tuition, to be part of the program. You might be able to just teach on the program and
Yeah.
not end up with a lot of extra debt after getting that degree.
Right. A lot of MFA programs are fairly small, so they usually provide like a lot more funding than undergrad programs do.
Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about actually, is like kind of giving that insight into like, is an MFA affordable and stuff like that. Are you interested in trying to teach at the college level as well?
Yeah, I think most of my peers who are in the MFA program are there because that is the plan to teach when they get out of school. For me, I feel like my purposes are pretty selfish. Like I could just like I just wanted to like grow as an artist and sort of like keep my development like moving.
I don't think that's selfish. I think that that's a valid source. That's a valid reason. So I wanted to talk about, I noticed on your bios and stuff like that that you both have participated in some residencies. And I kind of wanted to dive into that because I feel like maybe some students or emerging artists aren't aware of the opportunities that residencies can provide, or like what is residency.
Sure. Yeah. So artist residencies, there's a like really big spectrum of like what that means. I think traditionally, like they're called residencies because they literally provide a residence for you.
Yeah.
Not all of them do today, but I think like ideal situation, they will provide a residence for you to live in, a stipend, so like a little bit of money each like month or each week, depending on how long it is. Sometimes they provide food, a studio situation, and sometimes like facilities like a kiln or a wood shop or something alongside the program.
And sometimes even like a professional development or like a
Mhm.
networking of different people like around the residency. I always felt like the social aspect is really interesting with residencies where you get to kind of see behind the scenes, like with other artists, especially if it is a residency that has multiple artists, you can kind of talk shop with other artists and get some insight that is not always very visible. Like if you're just on the outside looking at an artist's social media or something.
What encouraged you to apply for a residency?
I mean, I guess like all of the above, really, like it's a great opportunity. Yeah, meeting people, like the social aspect, like James was saying, it is really amazing because even if you have a studio set up at home, being able to meet other people and see what like your peers are doing and like get inspired. I feel like it's a great way if you are in like kind of an artistic slump. It's a great way to like revitalize your practice and get excited about making art again, of course. And yeah, also just like meeting people. I find traveling is actually like really energizing for like my art practice. I kind of like that being in a new space and having a new like mindset.
I think too, like being depending on the residency, sometimes you can even hop into different mediums that aren't part of your normal practice. Like, for instance, I'm primarily a printmaker, but as a result of going to a residency that had a lot of like ceramics and like mold making, I was able to kind of start experiment, with like how does my work look in that process. And to this day, like post residency, I'm interested in doing ceramics and have like cultivated a small like ceramics process. So yeah.
That's cool. Do you have any advice for maybe emerging artists or artists who maybe don't have an undergrad degree yet? Maybe they're working through their program on like where to start looking at residencies or like what they should have prepared. I know every application is different and they have their guidelines clearly laid out for what they want, but do you feel like you had to submit like a full body of work for a residency, or do they is it typically more like they just wanna see what you're working on and kinda, like, go from there?
I think a big part of it, I mean, obviously, like part of being an artist, I think first is you have to kind of carve out time to regularly work on making new work and like documenting that work, like building it up. But also another part of it is I think people talk themselves out of opportunities that they could probably apply for by being like maybe a little too critical of the stuff they have. Like I know with my own like ceramic stuff, I don't feel like I have like a super big body of ceramics work. But, at this point I've been kind of working on it for at least 2 years. And it's like, okay, well, I don't feel like a beginner, but I don't feel like it's super developed at this point. But you can still like present those things and, present it as studies, present it as projects that you're working on, without necessarily saying this is 100% the way I want it to be or the way it could be. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think you should shut yourself down preemptively just because, there's more that you want to do with it.
Yeah. The other thing about residency applications is many of them, not all of them, but many of them are project based, and they kind of pride themselves on being a space for you to experiment and try something new. So what you want to do while you're at a residency doesn't necessarily have to be reflected exactly by your portfolio. Maybe you want to try something completely new while you're there. And that's like the time and breathing room to do that.
Will you guys be participating in Risorama this year?
Yes, we will be. So we will be traveling to San Marcos, bringing some new stuff, and we will have a couple of recent projects in their Paradiso juried show. So that should be exciting.
Cool. Well, so what does your, I guess, day-to-day average look like? Sarah, I know that you're in an MFA program right now, so I'm sure a lot of your time is taken up with school, but are you both like kind of full-time artists, like doing printmaking, mystic multiples, and all that stuff full-time, or do you have alternative incomes that you kind of work with?
Yeah. So for me, at least half my week is just like spent at school right now. But James and I we've both been self employed since the end of 2019. So we do lots of Mystic Multiples projects, but then each of us have like our kind of respective like hustles outside of that. Like I do a lot of illustration for hire, and I've done that for like years and years. And James does printing for clients.
Yeah, I would say the nuts and bolts of
Okay.
what kind of makes the magic possible is we travel to do shows. So like Riso Rama, like you mentioned, we'll travel for Zine Fest. That tends to be like in-person sales that we do as part of the self-employment income. We have an online store, so part of my day to day is like if anyone orders things online, it's packaging it up, like taking it to the post office. I try to carve out time for like whatever my personal practice is. So like today, for instance, later on, I'll go to the ceramic studio, work there for like 4 or 5 hours, trying to make new pieces. I just jump around. Like I might spend part of a day documenting things, part of the day working on those projects. And then occasionally we do printmaking. A lot of printmakers will end up doing commercial printing for people. So they'll print for other artists. And that's another aspect of what I do for self-employment income is to, print projects for people who don't do their own risograph printing.
And sometimes we get lucky and people come to us and want to work with both of us on a job. Like we're about to do a comic for a client where I'm illustrating the comic and James is printing it so that they'll have physical zines at the end of it.
When you talk about your in-person shows like that you go to sell work at, do you struggle with finding like the right show to sell your work at that makes it worth your while, or do you guys have kind of like a better idea at this point of like what shows are good for your kind of art, right?
Yeah, we have criteria.
Yeah, I feel like so I think every artist is going to go, if they're trying to do in-person sales or markets or stuff, you're going to go through a period of time where you're not really sure what kind of markets are good for your work. And that's kind of unavoidable. I think you have to do some of that as an experiment to see. At this point, though, we have been kind of doing this stuff since, I don't know, like 2010 or so. So it's luckily like a little bit more dependable where it's kind of rare for it to be just like an event where you make, I don't know, some events you could make less than minimum wage, like once you factor in all the time spent tabling, preparing, if there's a fee to table. So no, here's our top things that we always think about. We always think about one, what is the table fee? Ideally for us, it's $100 or less for a table fee, just because the higher the fee is, it's more money that you have to recoup, basically, that you have to sell stuff for. And also, honestly, like some events, like the Zine Fest are a good example of this. The table fee is, I don't know, and for some Zine Fest, like $30. And those we can actually make more sales than some of the, like quote unquote fine arts market type things. The other thing is like length of time, because, like the longer the festival is, it doesn't necessarily mean more sales for you as an artist. I think there's this idea that like there's more time, so more people can come. I'm really kind of doubtful of that. Like most of my experience is that the number of people who are going to come to an event are the number of people who are going to come. And, basically having a longer event just makes artists spend more time at the
Mhm.
event where they might not be paid for that time. And the third thing is just like trying to find work in the fest. Like it needs to be catered to the kind of stuff you make. Because if you imagine something like a holiday market where it's like every vendor is selling something different, like someone's doing hot sauce, someone's doing jewelry, someone's doing art, like, the people who come to those events, they're not really coming to buy what you have for sale. So for us, like most of what we do is zines and prints. So we are on the lookout for markets that specialize in prints and zines. And that's really where we do the best. So those are kind of like the magic three I recommend people to look at.
And proximity, like the closer it is to where you already live, of course, is like,
Yes. Yes. Because especially of us, we've traveled out of state, even out of country for some shows. But, we have two of us. So the travel costs, are doubled if we want to go somewhere. And that can be good to like finance a trip somewhere, but it is very difficult to make actual profit after all that travel expense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Could you talk about like pros and cons of working together with another person under like this title of like, I'm sure like, you know, I also work with my partner and we make ceramic pots together, and there's definitely tons of benefits, but sometimes, it's you just want to be by yourself. Could you talk about maybe like ways you overcome that, or like what are some things that you have learned as your partnership has grown?
I think one really nice aspect is that division of labor, that y'all can be working on like the same project, but split it and be like, okay, you hit, this side of it and I'll hit this other side of it. Always going to be more helpful, I feel like. But I will say it is super important as an artist. You need to have some degree of personal practice as well, even if it's like y'all are working on things independently and then kind of seeing like where they fit or where they can work together. And maybe Sarah, you could comment more on how you approach this.
yeah. Well, it's actually been so interesting because I've done shorter collaborations with people in my life where like friends who are artists who like want to do a zine together or like a show or something like that. And that's like always fun. But there is something really unique about having a partnership, an artistic collaboration like we do that's unfolded over like years and years. And I think what I have learned is like really to be open to change with, especially in respect to like your role in the collaboration, like needs to be flexible. If you plan to work together for years and years, you have to be able to adjust because, as artists, like, hopefully we're constantly evolving, learning new things, and like our desires for what we want the art to be is changing. So yeah, like being open to those possibilities and not being really like stuck in like James does this, I do this. That's the end of the story. Like trying to remain flexible and experimental to see like what unfolds.
All right, to end this lovely conversation, thank you guys so much. Do you have any advice for young or emerging artists, or maybe like unsure about their career path, or like do they go to school or not? Just like how do they find their passion in the arts? Whether they know that they like art, but like what do they want to do with it? From your perspective, now that you've had this experience, what would you say to young artists, I guess?
I have had a very traditional route, but from what I've seen, I feel like the art world is changing in a respect. Like your education, like I feel like I'm noticing more and more recognition that like you don't need to go to art school to be an artist, obviously, but also you don't need to go to art school to get the residencies, the shows, like whatever. Like it helps because you can meet people and network while you're in school. However, I feel like there is more and more recognitions from these institutions that like your educational background is not the end all be all. And that like whether you went to school for Russian like James or something else, through your own hard work, whatever your own apprenticeship, whatever the training looks like, you can be just as successful as somebody who goes through a traditional school program.
I sometimes I come back a lot to this quote that's like, "No matter where you go, there you are," and like I think that can kind of guide a lot of people because I think sometimes there's this idea that you have to get certain certificates or degrees, and that kind of gives you, like the whatever, like I'm a real artist, like commemorative T-shirt, but it doesn't have to be that way. And like, honestly, if you are making art in some capacity, you are already an artist and you can focus on improving that art and being a better artist. But always, I think, especially with the arts in like the current situation, it's very important to think about the financials of that. I mean, both of us, we worked for easily a decade where we had part-time job or full-time job and did art on the side as well. I think it is easy to get kind of trapped in that. Like you will eventually have to jump out of that if you want to be a full-time artist and like take a bit of a risk. And it's going to be really tough because by being an artist, you're going to be in a non-traditional career. So a lot of what is going to work in that career is not going to be what works in other careers. So that's like its own kind of like thing to deal with. But ultimately, if you go back, you kind of think about yourself, your life, your personal experience, you're going to have to look at that more so to determine if art is right for you than, is this degree going to make me an artist, or is this whatever, this next step going to make me finally an artist, right?
Well, beautiful. Thank you guys so much for sharing your information, your time, your experiences. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much.
This podcast is part of the Case-Based Contemporary Art Education Programming. Case-Based Contemporary is a 501c3 nonprofit organization committed to presenting and promoting contemporary art. As a dynamic forum for creative exchange and experimentation, we strive to educate and raise awareness for innovative art in South Texas. To support this podcast, please share, like, and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Case-Based Contemporary, or check out our education page on Instagram at Case-Based Art Lab. For those interested in contributing or becoming a member of Case-Based Contemporary, please visit our website at www.casebasedcontemporary.org.